So before we get started on our first How She Built It series, which I'm very excited about, I just want to make a couple of announcements. I'm Deborah McConkey, and I'm Chair of Programming for HBSWA. And I wanted to mention first some upcoming events. If you could put that slide up, Alexi. And today's event, as we said, we're going to introduce in a moment the beginning of our series on How She Built It. We also have Spotlight series coming up, Women on Boards, September 30th, and a slew of events for October. Lessons on Risk, From Poker to C-Suite. Investing in Women is a joint event that we're doing with the Kennedy School and the London School of Business, which will speak about women VCs and funds that are particularly for women-led businesses. And then we have global networking event and a whole series of other things coming up. Don't forget our roundtables. We have a couple of new ones as well, and our local events. Check the areas near you because we are adding local events all the time. So thank you. So today, I'm very excited. I'm going to introduce Yasi. And Yasi has agreed. She's also on the board of HBSWA. And the CEO and founder of Raya Advisory. And Yasi has been heading up this new series that we're doing on entrepreneurs. So for Raya Advisory, they offer product, AI, and business strategy, corporate upskilling workshops, and recruiting services. Prior to Raya, Yasi was Senior VP of Product and Marketing at Clio, and company launched multiple product lines under her watch. And she was also featured as one of the 27 most impressive Harvard MBAs by Business Insider. And she's been recognized 3 times as the LinkedIn Top Voices in Technology and Digital Health. So we're thrilled that she's agreed to spearhead this series. And you can take it away, Yasi, and introduce our speaker.
Thanks, Deborah. Hi, everyone. Great to meet you and see you here. I'm super excited to be here with Gina Bartasi. She's actually one of my role models and inspiration for me in many ways. So I'm super honored and grateful to be here with her today. And thank you all for joining us. Just a quick introduction on Gina. I know a lot of you know her pretty well. She's been a serial entrepreneur and pioneer in women's health and fertility. She founded both Proprietary, a now publicly traded company, and Kindbody, a multi-billion-dollar company with over 600 employees. She brings more than 20 years of experience leading health tech ventures from inception through hypergrowth. After launching Proprietary in 2015, Gina recognized that employers wanted to contract directly with fertility providers, saving millions in costs while improving outcomes. And listening to her customers and their insights, she founded Kindbody in 2018, assembling a team of experienced healthcare providers and operators to reimagine fertility care delivery. Since then, Kindbody raised over $300 million from top investors. And Kindbody today is leading U.S. fertility clinic network and global family building benefit provider on a mission to make fertility care more accessible and affordable for all. The company serves patients through 27 state-of-the-art clinics and IVF labs, a network of 400 plus partner clinics, and coverage in 113 countries worldwide. Recognized for technology, innovation, and industry leadership, Kindbody has been in CNBC Disruptor 50, Fast Company's Brands That Matter, Forbes Best Startup Employer, and the list goes on. I'm super happy and grateful for Gina to give her time to us. Thanks for being here, Gina. You had an incredible career. We just covered a small part of it, even though the list was long. You started not only one, two companies in women's health and fertility. Tell us a little bit about where did it all started? Where did your career started? Why did you decide to become a founder, and why did you decide to go in women's health?
Yeah, thank you, Yasi and HBSWA for having me here today. I'm honored to be here, so thank you. Um, I think I didn't know any better than to be a founder and self-reliant. When I graduated undergrad, there was a recession and I was offered a job on straight commission. And so from a very early age, I knew about um, top line management and cash management. And so because my first job was a straight commission job without health insurance and without a base salary, I was a natural risk taker. And after working straight commission for a few years, it was actually a very easy step to move to a founder. And then as I grew in my career, when I first founded, it was a magazine publishing company in Atlanta, Georgia. It had no outside capital. It wasn't until later that I knew that you could raise funds. And I learned the difference between venture capital and private equity and hedge funds and how each fund thinks. And so, that's how I got my start as a founder. And I was a very young founder in my, mid 20s, but I was always kind of a risk taker. How I got started in women's health, because my first startup was actually in media entertainment. I owned a group of magazines, again, in Atlanta, but moved to New York when I was in my mid 30s. Got married at 38, which seemed incredibly young, is incredibly young. And we started having problems having children, like most 38-year-olds. Fertility decline is real. Side note, everyone, freeze your eggs. Because I think egg freezing does provide women an opportunity to balance the playing field and to have children on their own time frame. But I'm certainly passionate about women's health. I was passionate about fertility. The industry was incredibly opaque. It wasn't very customer centric. Some things have changed in those last 15 years. The companies I was fortunate to work with others to build are responsible for that change in the industry. But women's health is near and dear to my heart. And it was just it was an easy transition after being an entrepreneur, being another entrepreneur, and then really picking this women's health segment that I was very, very passionate about. Changing when I went through IVF treatment, all the doctors were male. There was no technology. There was this, incredible waste of time between telephone tag. All the charts were paper, and it was pretty easy to disrupt because the status quo, all of that was so poor. The patient experience was incredibly poor. So it was ripe for disruption. So I just was fortunate to be in the right place at the right time. I will add too, I think there are cities that embrace entrepreneurs and make starting a business easier. Certainly Boston is one of those. I was in New York City. It's in the top three. People think about the Valley, Silicon Valley. Progyny was headquartered in, eventually we moved the headquarters to Manhattan, but when I took over the company, it was in Silicon Valley. So LA would be another one, but it's very, very difficult, I think, to start a business at scale. You can start businesses in any community, but to have a business at scale, you really need the startup ecosystem. You need an extraordinary team, and I've worked with some of the best, but you need this ecosystem of bankers, of funders, of relationships, and it's hard to beat those in those handful of cities I named.
That's great. So you basically follow a personal problem that you saw in the market, and then you brought all of your skills of entrepreneurship and tried to solve that, but also timing was right. I feel like even 15 years later, we still have, a lot of gaps in the kind of fertility market, but we came a very long way. And of course, like both Progyny, Kindbody have been very, very fundamental in making those changes. That's great. So let's talk about a little bit about challenges, because I'm sure we all sitting here, it kind of feels easy. You build two really large, scaled companies. And it kind of feels like, oh, it was very, comfortable to do that. But we all know there have been a ton of challenges that you face every single day. Tell us about, dark nights of the soul moments. What were the toughest early challenges that you faced that you feel like if I wouldn't kind of solve that, or if I would give up there, we would not be here. We wouldn't be able to build the scale companies. Talk to us about that.
Yeah, sure, Yasi. Again, to your point, there are challenges every single day. Every day there are challenges. There are people-related challenges. There's always funding challenges. There are new businesses, competitors that you didn't anticipate. So most of the challenges you handle, and again, as you get older, you get more experience because you've seen those challenges before. When you're early in your career, a challenge is new to you. You know, your job, one of the things I do, I hope well, is to study other successful entrepreneurs. So I was fortunate enough, Bobbi Brown Cosmetics, now Jones Road, you know, she says there aren't any mistakes that you make professionally. There are only lessons learned, right? And so when you see a challenge, you see a mistake, your job as an entrepreneur and a founder is to learn quickly and say, let's not make that mistake again. And then if you do, which does happen, is to say, wait a minute, I've seen this challenge before, and here's how I overcame it successfully, or here's what I wish I would have done, and this time I'm going to have the opportunity to do it right. When you talk about dark nights of the soul, and really because most challenges can be dealt with pretty easily, you got to get very, very good at making decisions quickly. Analysis paralysis will time kills all deals, time kills all opportunities. So you have to get very comfortable making a lot of times very intuitive decisions. A lot of gut instinct goes into it, particularly early in your career. But when you're really losing sleep, it usually has to do with payroll and not making it. So, you know, even when the company is very early, you know, you're managing cash. Sometimes the receivables don't come in like your cash flow projection had projected. And so whether that was at Proprietary or Kindbody, at Proprietary, I can remember the early iteration of Proprietary was a company I had founded called Fertility Authority. We had raised a friends and family round. We needed to raise our Series A. I had reached out to 163 funds before we knocked on the door at Kleiner Perkins in the Valley, in Silicon Valley and Menlo Park, and said, we're raising our Series A round. And so one of those lessons and challenges is you just have to stay persistent. You have to be resilient. Even after 163 no's, I knocked on the door, and I was fortunate. Kleiner Perkins had a medical device business which had missed product market fit, and they really needed to make an investment in the fertility industry because they already had kind of a troubled asset. And my job was to turn around that asset and then scale the fertility benefits business with Proprietary. And absent that acquisition, they eventually bought Fertility Authority, which grew into Proprietary. Then it would have been challenging again to have the necessary funds to build a really big business at scale. Same thing at Kindbody. We had raised some friends and family money. We needed to raise our A. You're always, again, trying to manage cash. You don't ever want to raise money if you don't need money, unless people are throwing money at you, which happens rarely. It has happened recently in 2021 and early 22, where people are just putting a lot of money to work. Many funds got burned, many high net worth individuals got burned, so no one's throwing money at anything anymore. But at Kindbody, I was fortunate to step in with a personal investment. You know, I can remember the early days. You know, you could start to see cash, and we were going to be short of making payroll. And I invested $1 million personally into the business. I invested every round along the way because I felt like if I was asking Morgan Health or Google Ventures or others to write a check at this valuation, I wrote a check. So I owned my shares that I had earned as the founder and CEO, but then I was a preferred investor buying equity. And that's very rare. Most founders cannot afford to buy equity along the way. But anyway, those are, again, challenges, valuable lessons to, you know, where you're thinking about cash and losing sleep. But you press forward. You have to, because you just, and it was never in either one of those companies. It was never just me. There were lots of people at the executive level who were losing sleep. I don't know, you know, I tried to keep, when you're handling a challenge, you want to keep the audience that knows about that challenge very small. But particularly at Kindbody, I had a tight group of early founders who were with me shoulder to shoulder, who were sharing some of those challenges. They were not in a position to invest in the business, but we rewarded them other ways, given the sacrifices they made early on as well.
That's amazing. So much lesson there. I feel like, you know, what you talked about in terms of resilience, I think is so key. Like, I'm a second-time founder, and I work with a lot of founders. And what I've learned and watching, and to your point, studying other founders, people who make it versus not, is truly how much resilience they have and how they can push through the tough times, because every business, every founder, every category will face them all the time. And it's really about how you push through it. And cash flow and funding is one of the major ones. That's how people will make it or break it. And companies will get through different stages. And you make great points. Like, it's, you know, even for a founder, second time founder, it takes you 100+ reach out to find the, you know, funding. And even for any company, I think at different stages, you may be very attractive for investors or you may not. So you have to just kind of push through that. Do you have any specific advice in terms of fundraising for women's health? I'm assuming some people here might be in that category, or people who may listen to the recording later. I feel like women's health particularly is a bit more challenging for investors, because most of the investors themselves are male and they may not directly relate to the problems that are facing in that category. Any kind of lessons learned particularly that's important for women's health, women type of product or businesses in terms of fundraising?
Yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Yasi. So investors are often pattern recognition investors, and they see things they're sympathetic to and they'll invest in. And it is very hard for male investors. Remember, only 2.4% to 2.6%. So less than 3% of all invested capital goes to women founders and women businesses in general. Never mind, then a subsegment of that would be women's health and women founded businesses. So 97%, more than 97% of the time, you're going to be presenting to a male investor, and it's hard for them to be sympathetic to your menstrual cycle, to your PCOS or endometriosis or whatever you're going through, that they just cannot imagine abdominal pain related to your menses every month. Like they just goes, whoop, you know, and then often you'll hear them say, oh, well, my wife mentioned that one, you know, and you're like, no, it's not the same. So I worked hard to create an opportunity for women investors to invest in women's health. You know, you also can't fight the market. That 2.7% going into women's health has not changed materially in the last 15 years. What has changed is Proprietary went public. There've been some other women's health success stories, none that have gone to public. The next thing that needs to happen. You can get men to back women's health companies. It's just significantly harder. And right now there's a lot of dry powder still sitting on the sidelines. But once some of these women's health companies can get public and provide a return to their shareholders, it should get easier. But, you know, when you just ask, you know, what advice that I would have for any other women that are thinking about getting into women's health, you know, don't do it if you are not prepared to make extraordinary sacrifices. Being resilient means making sacrifices. Maybe you skip a workout to take a call. Maybe you constantly on an airplane. You're making sacrifices both to you. Remember, I was married. I went through IVF. I had twin boys. They're now teenagers, which is kind of crazy to think about. But you have to be prepared to make these extraordinary sacrifices, certainly early on. And even as the company gets bigger, the challenges are of different scale.
Makes total sense. Makes total sense. And I feel like every company, especially when it gets to the stage that you get, you know, Kindbody and Proprietary, it dies a few times before it gets to those scales. Like, I'm sure you remember moments that you're like, we are over, we are done. There is no path to succeed here, either running out of funding or big competitor coming, or, you know, like big employee issue, executive, you know, exit. What are the key turning points where you felt like Kindbody, you know, is kind of maybe dying, or it truly has like the momentum that you want? Like, you can talk about either one. Like, where were those like very strong moments that you're like, either we are dead or like we really got this, or we are in a path to scale? And what were the signs of those?
Yeah, you know, you plan with your team kind of what could go wrong, and you do risk mitigation. Okay, have we thought about competitors? Are we looking around the corner? Are we staying well networked and well connected to know about other entrants who could disrupt our business? The things that hurt a more mature scaled business are things that are out of your control. So when the funding market changes pretty dramatically, that's often out of your control. But specific to Kindbody, things that are out of your control is that Ron DeSantis in Florida, the governor of Florida, decides to get into a very public dispute with Disney. And at the time, Kindbody has a clinic on site at Disney. Kindbody sells fertility benefits into large employers. We sell women's health solutions into large employers. You can imagine that the Disney population has a higher percentage of LGBTQ plus employees. We proudly serve those employees because historically they've been left out of the healthcare system. And so we're on site at Disney, and DeSantis comes in and Disney's like, okay, wait, so you're not allowed to say gay, except we treat gay people proudly. And all of a sudden you're in a complete blank storm of things that you could not have ever predicted. So, this was recent, 3 years ago, depending on how old you are, whether you think three years ago is recent or not. But those are the things that I think that are hardest for founders, are how you handle challenges that have come up that are out of your control. And we're like, okay, do we close the clinic? Like, we don't want to be a part of the public dispute, except we were very public, because at the center of this don't say gay argument is, a women's health clinic that is very proud to support LGBTQ audiences. So anyway, again, there are other instances, but that one sticks out as, again, a challenge that we had to face and overcome in a very public dispute that was, again, out of our control.
Yeah, that makes total sense. So it seems like things that you can plan and predict are more controllable, and macro level things or regulatory changes or economic changes that are sudden is much harder to navigate. Totally makes sense. I'm curious, over time, as you went through this multiple years of building and growing as a leader, and particularly as a founder, how did your kind of leadership style change? Where maybe did you start, and then maybe what are the more profound changes that you've seen yourself?
I would like to think, I got a lot more patient as an older leader. I was a lot more thoughtful and a lot more deliberate. And when you're a young founder, you're impulsive, right? And you're hiring quickly, and you're like, oh, you want to work here? And it was like, oh, how excited. I became more deliberate. We were, in a position to hire the very best of the best. We did not have a lot of turnover at Kindbody. We had, again, and I had created an intentional culture of people who were like me, very hardworking, very committed to changing women's health, very passionate about women's health. And we were fortunate, again, to recruit the very, very best of the best, who all made sacrifices. They were disproportionately women. More than, I think at one point, 85% of our team were women. That means they made sacrifices, again, to their spouses, to their families. I can remember my colleague, had a honeymoon, but it was postponed. Like, she worked entirely. We did an acquisition. Same thing happened when she had her first child, and I kept apologizing. I promise you will eventually get a honeymoon, and you'll eventually get mat leave. But women make these, again, extraordinary sacrifices, and so only women can carry a baby. Like, again, I think women founders face significantly different challenges, and arguably much bigger challenges as female founders than our male counterparts, because of the family dynamic.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's already, being a founder is really hard, like adding everything else on top of it. It just makes it super challenging. Let's talk about, your advice for founders. I'm sure there's some of the people here who are experienced leaders. They're considering their own, entrepreneurial path. If you can talk about what's your recommendation or advice for women, particularly about timing, risk taking, anything else that they should consider if they decide to kind of take on this path.
To start now. It's almost would be similar to the advice I would give women to when is the right time to freeze their eggs. Do it now. Starting a business is, again, risky. There are a ton of sacrifices, and that just gets harder as you get older. It's not impossible to start a company at 50 or plus 50. It's just easier when you don't have a ton of responsibility. You can afford to take risk. So that's, if anyone is contemplating starting a business, they should do it now. And people would say, okay, is now the best time to start a company? The fundraising environment, particularly for early stage businesses, has not returned to where it was in 2021, early part of 22. I don't know that that time period is ever coming back. What's happening in fundraising is that a lot of different types of capital, family offices, high net worth individuals came in to the capital environments, to the private capital markets at that time. A lot of them were very bruised and lost a ton of money through different financing structures. And I don't know that you're going to see a period of time again where fundraising is that easy and people are chasing deals. There were SPACs, now SPACs are coming back. So markets are cyclical. So you may see a fundraising environment like that where there's competitive bids. There are competitive bids for AI for sure. And the valuations, I heard this morning on CNBC, 55 companies today that are public, listen to this, 55 companies today that are public are up in the stock market more than 50% just the month of September. That's an extraordinary return, 50% in 1 month. And only 6 are profitable. Okay, that means you're constantly still having to raise capital to be able to fund those businesses until they get to profitability. So when I say the fundraising environment's difficult, it's still very, very healthy for a lot of semiconductor AI. There are markets that are still funding rapidly. But the point to founders, I wouldn't try and time the market. The very first business I started was during a recession, because when things are challenging, it forces the founder to think about profitability and cash flow earlier and faster than you would in an easy fundraising environment. And so the fact that my first 2 companies were bootstrapped and we didn't have any outside capital was wildly advantageous to me, because when the capital markets changed pretty dramatically, and then I had stepped back to the exec chair role at Kindbody, the board brought me back via a unanimous vote in mid-year last year. It was instinctive. You've got to cut costs. And then it is always, when you think about cutting costs, you have to balance that with growth. And then the hardest job for any founder is to continue rapid growth. That's double-digit growth rate while cutting costs. That is incredibly difficult to do. You can do it, and experienced founders do it better than most, but it's hard. So
that's great. And if you could go back in time, would you do something differently?
I do. I try to live a life of no regrets. I wouldn't do anything differently. It's, the secret to success really still comes back to hard work and being humble and finding, again, I love women. So finding other women who share your vision, that say, we can do this together, and sharing responsibility and sharing credit. And so, I don't have any regret. There are some specific regrets when you think about fundraising. Again, knowing early on what kind of funds, startups really should be funded by proven experienced venture capital. And when you start getting EBITDA positive, growth funds or private equity funds. Remember earlier, I mentioned there was all this new capital coming in. They were chasing high returns in 2021, 22. You saw high net worth individuals. You saw SPVs, special purpose vehicles. That's people who would bring in other angel investors to invest in a business. And then you saw hedge funds go earlier. Hedge funds typically are quant strategy traders. They're only ever investing in public markets, and they wanted higher yield. They wanted higher returns. So they came and invested earlier in startups. Hedge funds are not equipped to invest in startups, because when things get sideways, they panic. Because again, they don't do private capital markets. So when I said earlier that I don't think those funds and that capital is coming back, I don't think it is. I don't think you're going to see SPVs, high net worth individuals, and hedge funds coming earlier, because there's a lot of indigestion. Again, there are all these pivots and bumps in the roads, and it's hard for hedge funds to think about how to help from an operational standpoint those young early stage companies kind of see through that. That's something venture funds and private equity funds are very, very experienced in doing. So Kindbody took money from a hedge fund. I think in hindsight, you want to make sure you match your sponsor to the business needs. And again, I don't think hedge funds are going to come earlier stage now. And I don't think early stage founders I wouldn't take money from a hedge fund again. And then the other valuable lesson is, as you think about where your capital sources come from, we also took debt. There's bank debt, which is traditional debt. You can only get bank debt when you're EBITDA positive. There's more and more private capital. That's private capital is private debt, private credit. The hedge fund had both the equity piece as well as the debt piece. And entrepreneurs more skilled than me would have said the same thing. Gina, whatever you do, don't take your credit source and your equity source from the same fund. And I did that. And I did that recently in the last couple of years. So I think that's like hearing from Bobby Brown. If Bobby were on this call, she would say the same thing. Gina, I still make mistakes. Don't worry. You're going to continue to make mistakes. And so that's what I would want the other founders to do is to know I still make mistakes. By the way, I'll make 1 million more. And so it's to embrace the mistakes, to embrace the experience, to the learning, and then know next time if you choose to start yet another business, again, don't raise money from people not experienced to run startups and invest in startups, and never take your debt and your equity from your same sponsor.
That's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, because I 100% agree. And these decisions feels easy when we're hindsight looking at it, and but I'm sure when you were in the thick of it and you're trying to raise millions of dollars, and then there's a hedge fund coming give you money in the valuation you want versus any other terms or any other investors, it's very different. So I appreciate you sharing that, and also sharing the fact that we all continue to do mistakes. I personally think that people who just bounce back faster are the ones that have time to do interesting things with their company or with their life, and people who stay in the mistakes, then it's just not helpful. I was listening to one of your interviews, and something you said really resonated with me. So I would love to bring it to this audience too. There was a conversation around ageism, and we all see it at workplace today. Like a lot of times it feels like when people turn 40, they're not relevant for companies anymore. And in this interview with Forbes, you mentioned that over time you felt actually more confident as a leader and as an executive. And you mentioned that with age comes wisdom, and with wisdom comes confidence. So actually, a lot of times that's really valuable for companies, would it be founder or executive or mid-level manager. Can you speak a little bit about that, and how could we kind of bring that mindset maybe to broader industry?
Yeah, I think it's coming naturally, maybe not naturally, but 40 is not old. 40 is like the new 20, and 50 is the new 30. We're all living longer, like some of the hottest companies, right? So I think that just happens, whether it's in business or personally. As you get older, you take those learned lessons, and you're a better partner, you're a better sister, you're a better daughter, you're a better friend. And so there are tremendous advantages to being older. I do think, as it comes back to being an entrepreneur, and that 97% of the people you raise money from, now what you're seeing is not only are they men, but they're much younger men. And so, what I want to do is be incredibly frank and direct with the audience, that they understand that now you've got two things working against you. One is you're female. B is you may be 20 to 30 years older than the guy capable. And maybe he's not writing the check, but he's on the investment committee, and he's he's responsible for selling your story. So that's why I would tell, again, the women on the call to start a business as early as possible, so that you want to be able to mitigate as many negatives as you have against you. So you already have your gender. If you wait until you're 50 to start a company, now you have your gender and your age. Maybe that starts to happen in your mid 40s, but I would just encourage all women to start businesses and take risk when they're younger, when they don't have as many responsibilities.
That's great. And to wrap it up, when you look back at your really rich life and career, what are you most proud of?
My kids. That's easy.
That's amazing. That's amazing to hear, because I hear that from a lot of people who do amazing things with their life, and ultimately it really comes down to families and, you know, other things we build aside from businesses and companies. Great.
Similar
Yeah,
to that, Yasi,
yeah.
what it's not my kids, you know, they have, I hear when they're off for play dates or anything, they have really nice manners. They're respectful. They're just really good kids. Now, I'm not that objective, but I would tell you that they're really good kids based on other people's opinions. What I'm most proud of is I have boys, right? And boys get to see mom working and being successful, quote unquote, being successful, right? And that's what, like, you know, I grew up, neither one of my parents went to college. And so, and it was hard, almost, it was impossible then to find a female executive who had done, quote unquote, very well professionally. We're creating more and more of those women. And for my boys in particular to be able to see a mom who, you know, and they're sympathetic. Like, you know, I try today not to miss any baseball games or football games. Now, when I do, I'm pretty candid with them about the sacrifices I made and why I missed this particular game or this particular practice. And so having that discussion early and helping the kids understand that mom's a working mom and that her job in particular requires sacrifice and resilience and travel. But the fact that they did, they embrace that now and they understand that. So that's what I'm proud of is the extraordinary human beings they've turned out to be, but also to be able to set an example so that they see career moms.
That's great. I love that, because I agree with you. We need more of that, and we need more men raising in families to see that's possible, and that's part of the equation, so that they can also support more women to do and continue to do the same thing. Lexi, do we allow question from the audience?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
So I wanted to, first of all, Gina, thank you for giving your time to us. This was such a pleasure to talk with you and learn from you. And I wanted to open up if anyone has any question for Gina.
I do. Can I go with the question?
Yeah, go for it.
Hi, I'm Mo. I'm with the FC Urgent Care. By the way, this was really insightful. Thank you, Gina. I always admired your work. I've been following you. And thank you, Yasi, as well. Gina, you've seen firsthand what it takes to raise capital and to scale a company like Kindbody. So from an ecosystem perspective, do you think operators and founders like yourself perhaps need to invest in de-risk by investing in emerging managers, especially focusing on women's health? And would you be open to something like that to build out this category?
For sure, Mo. If we're going to back women founders, we need more women check writers, right? And we need more women emerging managers. But the true real problem with that is the large pension funds and the large check writers don't often back emerging managers, and particularly female emerging managers. And the reason is, it's not anything against the endowments, but the emerging managers need a track record, and they just don't have it yet. What happened is, and you guys probably know this, but in 2020, 21, and early 22, there was all this money that rushed in. In many, many instances, you would have had a liquidity event by now. But the public markets have been atrocious from an IPO. Now that's starting to change. But when I say markets are cyclical, usually when the markets go up and markets go down, they'll adjust every 1.5 to 2 years. We've now been in this lull where emerging managers and other SPVs and early stage fund managers have not had a liquidity event. So when you go to raise capital from an endowment or somebody that can write a $10 million, $20 million, $50 million check into an emerging manager, the first thing they say is, show me your, IRR. What is your return on equity capital you've invested? And they can't show a portfolio where they've had a number of exits. So it was always hard for emerging female managers to raise capital. Now it's particularly hard. Because they have not had sufficient exits. Hopefully that changes. If we would have had this conversation 12 to 18 months ago, I would have said that's going to change, that markets are cyclical and it will come back. It's been a really long period of time not to have liquidity. I'd like to think that's opening up, but we're in October and there's still only been a handful of notable IPOs. We need the public markets to come back because that will trickle down. So hopefully it's 26, but in 24, I said, hopefully that's 25, and that hasn't materialized.
Would you be considering an IPO soon to give backing to exactly what, this will essentially benefit that exactly what you said, the exit scenarios? Just wondering.
Yeah, so, I'd like to think Kindbody could be in an IPO position. A lot's changed since I stepped back last December. So I don't know that the public markets are an opportunity. You'd have to ask them whether there's a public market opportunity. I've written a number of angel checks. I know there's a great group of women. Haley Tecco, I believe, is also an HBS grad. Maybe she's at Columbia, but there's this great group of women angel investors that then bring in other women and write checks. The challenge is that those women have not had liquidity, or what's happened in the fundraising environment in the last 12 to 24 months is the very big hedge funds and the very big funds have gotten very punitive when those companies need follow-on capital. And they've done not just down round financing, they've done cram down financings. Haley's talked about it. Carolyn Witte, who's got Astia, another badass female. Like there are, you can look at Jen at Rent the Runway. You can look at, there's a number of good examples where you had these emerging managers, you had these SPVs, you had individual check writers like me, and they've gotten crushed. Sometimes legally, sometimes illegally. But what you're going to see again is women now being apprehensive to write checks to create this ecosystem when hedge funds can come in or other large sources of capital and really crush the early stage ecosystem. And you're seeing it when you look at asset allocation of the big family offices. The asset allocation, they used to want to invest in private markets and early stage founders and emerging managers, and they've moved that asset allocation back to the public markets just in the last 12 to 18 months. So it's difficult. It is very difficult. Once the market comes back, and I don't know when that is, and there's some liquidity, again, I think you're still going to see some apprehension from early stage. I'm not writing any more checks. I was writing checks to other female founders, and I had to tell extraordinary female founders who I know and would back. But it's just until the capital markets change where they are fruitful for early stage investors again, I think it's going to be very hard, Mo. Unfortunately, I wish I had better news.
Yeah, no, that's thanks for being candid and sharing. Thank you.
Thank you. Monica, go for it.
Hi, Gina. Thank you so much for sharing this. It's really exciting to hear your story. I was at McKinsey for 10 years, and now I am in the startup world, also in the healthcare space. So very much admiring you from the sidelines. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about how you have been thinking about building your leadership team. And it's so critical in early stage companies, and as you are scaling, to have the right team that really kind of comes together. At the same time, people's skill set really differs, what you need early on versus later. Would love to get your thoughts on like how you have approached that challenge.
Yeah, again, earlier in my career, it's like investing. You want to, I thought I want to hire people that are like me. I would never recommend that. You actually want to hire people that are very different than you. The differing opinions helps you be a better leader. It helps create a better business. And so deliberately at Kindbody, I wanted to build a founding team who had extraordinary skill sets that were different than mine. What we shared was work ethic. What we shared was a mission and a desire and a passion to create something different. But from a skill set standpoint, which was different than a value standpoint, from a values, we all believe the same from a value standpoint, but I wanted to hire somebody different than me. And then what you have to do is yield the floor and trust them infinitely. And that was critical to the success. Is you should not be proud. I didn't need to make every decision. There are lots of decisions I didn't make where I deferred, again, to someone smarter than me. And I think the most experienced entrepreneurs are not afraid to do that, is to hire somebody smarter than you. You do not and should not arguably be always the one that's making the decisions or the largest voice at the table. You can actually be more successful if you'll yield the floor and allow other people's voices to be heard and for them to make decisions.
Great. Thank you for sharing that, Gina. Renata?
Yes, thank you. This was, I mean, amazing, super inspirational. It's actually interesting that I went right after Monica because it's a similar question, but kind of on the other side. If you were looking to join an early stage startup, what would you be looking at, the questions? Like, what do you think are the components that make it make sense for that?
Scale and cash flow today is really, really important. Again, we've already talked about it, and we'll be talking about it for decades. Women start from a very negative position, and so you are going to have to think about getting cash flow positive sooner than anybody else. You're going to have to think about having an exit sooner than anybody else. And so when I mentor or talk to young female founders, I will say, how big can this business get? And they're like, it can get to $10 million or it can get to $20 million. Those businesses, if your business cannot attain $100 million in top line revenue within the first 5 years, which is very aggressive. So let's just call it within the first 10 years. Okay. But more than $100 million, and $100 million, you ought to be EBITDA positive and you really should be cash flow positive. Those are the things that are backable, that would get the interest of other experienced executives to help. But if the business is challenged from a scale standpoint, or it's going to take a long time to get to cash flow positive. So think about med devices, drug discovery. There are other businesses that need a huge infusion of capital before they get to cash flow positive. I think that's very difficult to get women behind right now because the deck is already stacked against them. So there's just, it just makes it harder for them to achieve quote unquote success or an exit. But there are still lots of businesses that can reach scale, EBITDA positive and cash flow positive in a short amount of time. And that's the other thing, when you're fundraising, you really need to know the life of the fund when those funds need a liquidity event themselves, because that will affect often in the boardroom what you have to do from an exit standpoint or a fundraising standpoint. The venture capital firms, their fund horizon is a lot longer because their yield, their return should be a lot higher. But as you get to the more experienced capital, they may only need a 2 to 3 times the return, but boy, do they need it quickly. Remember when I mentioned the hedge fund, they're like, shoot people a lot shorter. In the public markets, you have immediate liquidity. And that's how they think about making investment decisions, is immediate liquidity. So you just have to know what, and that's important, whether it's your colleague or your fund manager or your investor, what do they need out of this relationship? What's important to them?
Right. So it's not just about a company has a funding, but it's also studying it and understand, like, who do they have funding from, how long they have to wait for getting their return, and how does that dictate some of the strategies that the investors will kind of encourage or push the founders and executives to make. That's super helpful. Deborah, go for it.
Hi. Well, I think you answered one of the questions, the issue of growth versus profitability, which tends to go in cycles. As you said, in 21, it was all just about growth at any expense. If you can speak to that in today's climate, and also you had mentioned how you grow, achieve aggressive growth, and cut costs at the same time. What are some of the strategies that you looked at? In other words, sometimes there's the cliche of marketing always gets cut first, but are there really things from your perspective that you looked at or had pressure to cut while you were still growing?
Yeah. Growing while cutting cost is incredibly difficult. I will tell you how you can do it is lower your growth rate. Okay. So companies growing every single year at double digits. So double digit is 10%. So you can grow a company at 10% unless the company is really young. and you do $1 million in revenue, and then you're only growing 10%, now you're doing 1.1 million. Like, your growth rate should be significantly higher when the business is young. When the business gets to scale, kind of that plus 100 million, in order to grow rapidly and still cut cost, what I would have, should have done is lower my growth rate significantly. We were still growing more than 50% annually once we had achieved $100 million. That's what's difficult. And then the other thing that's difficult is to know where your cash burn is and where your CapEx costs are. We were building 4-wall clinics. I mentioned the clinic in Disney in Orlando, but we sell, again, employer benefits, and they wanted us to open an office in Columbus and one in San Diego and one in Seattle. So you had to sign leases and lease negotiation, and you're signing 10-year leases. And then when the market changes and you're going to pause or not open the Philadelphia location, but you've now just signed a 10-year lease, how you mitigate that risk, how you unwind that lease, like, that is really, really hard, because you're assuming that the capital is going to come, that the growth is going to come. And when you intentionally lower your growth rate from 50% to 30%, what are the other costs that you can cut? And trying to get out of a lease is a very difficult thing. And then you end up cutting people instead of leases, because people are easier to let them go and pay 2 weeks or 2 months of severance or something than trying to unwind a lease. So again, I think when I look at businesses in the future, trying to stay out of high cash burn and heavy CapEx expensive, a 4-wall business is just heavy CapEx expenses, is where I would stay out. I would stay asset light, so that you have more levers to pull when things go poorly. You can more easily and more quickly cut cost.
Thank you. Great perspective.
Great. Beth, go for it.
Hi, I hope I missed, unfortunately, the beginning of this. I hope there's going to be a recording. But I just wanted to add to what Gina had to say about the realities of the market out there. It might be harder for women, but it's not just a woman problem. It's also, it's not like the men are knocking the cover off the ball. And the other thing that I think makes it worse in today's environment is a lot of the realization that going public, while it might create liquidity, it creates a whole slew of other problems. And people are choosing, operating teams are saying, why am I going to go public? Which slows down this, this return of capital to reinvest in something else. So I don't know what that means for people who want to start a business, other than thinking about businesses that where you can see your way clear to a cash return, and where you need less money and you're not beholden to this terrible world of venture capital. And when I say terrible, let's say challenging world.
Yeah, I think, whether or not, we're not going to talk about politics, but the new administration does embrace M&A. So now, for other founders, instead of thinking about going public, you may start a business and think, I'm in women's health. A lot of the payers, Cigna, United, they have active corporate venture arms, and they are actively making acquisitions. So your exit and your return of capital to your shareholders doesn't have to be a public market anymore. It could be M&A to a health fund or to another competitor. So the M&A market, I think, is coming back and has come back. I also think that the administration and others knows how cumbersome the public markets are from a public market reporting standpoint. And management teams are now running businesses based on every 90 days. And it is incredibly difficult to forecast on every 90 days, because things change again that are out of your control. So one of the things I heard recently, which I would embrace, is instead of quarterly earnings, and I didn't know this, but in Europe, they don't have quarterly earnings in many countries. It's earnings every 6 months. You want to provide your shareholders and public market investors visibility into your business, but it would be a lot easier to only do that twice a year and every 6 months instead of every 90 days. So I think the points that Beth raised, people that can solve those the administration and others, the SEC, are trying to be sympathetic because, and Beth is right, it's not just women and it's not just first-time founders who are struggling with this liquidity crisis, but we've got to start cycling some money through the industry again. And whether it's changing the public reporting requirements from 3 months to 6 months or others, we're not going to be able to solve that. I want every woman, when we adjourn, every woman that wants to start a company today should do it tomorrow. And that's the only lesson you have to take away from this is do it. Like there's no time better. Like I've started businesses in recessions and when markets are very good, just do it. You'll regret it later on. If you do it and fail, who cares?
Yeah, I started a business at the age of 55.
Great.
So if that's any inspiration, but I also started a professional services firm that was cash flow positive immediately, and I didn't need any money other than my own, which did make it easier, but I realize that's not, but you're right, Gina. They want to do it, they should do it.
Great. Awesome. So I think one lesson is if you want to do it, just do it, pull the trigger. But also there were a lot of other great insights that Gina shared in terms of how to think about building your team, how to think about fundraising. There were a lot of great information you shared about fundraising and how should people think about it, both from founders' perspective, but also people who are considering joining different companies. Very much appreciate your time, Gina. Again, thanks everyone for joining, and thanks for HBSWA to bring us all together and enable us to hearing Gina firsthand in a very small setting, which was truly a pleasure. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a good rest of the day.
Thank you, Gina.
Take care.
Bye-bye.
And thank you, Yassi.
Absolutely.